He was the prince of that vast farm, heir to wealth and prestige. But tired of interested smiles and calculated glances, he decided to wear simple clothes and mingle with the village workers. Among the many who ignored or scorned him, a humble young woman, bearing the weight of family and a difficult life, offered him something that not even gold could buy: genuine kindness and generosity. Who would have imagined that the poorest girl in the village would end up transforming his life forever? Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. The sun had barely risen on the horizon when Henry opened his eyes that spring morning in 1920. Lying in his bed, he watched the golden rays filter through the imported silk curtains. With a sigh, he got up and walked to the window, from where he could contemplate the vastness of his family's lands. Green fields stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with workers who were already beginning their daily journey. Henry Westfield was only 25 years old, but he carried the weight of a legacy spanning 3 generations on his shoulders, known as the Crown Prince. His grandfather had explored those lands with his own hands, his father had expanded them with business vision, and now everyone expected him, the sole heir, to elevate the family name even further. "Good morning, Mr. Westfield." The voice of Martha, the housekeeper who had known him since childhood, interrupted his thoughts. "Breakfast is served, and your father awaits you in the library after the meal." Henry nodded, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. Conversations with his father always followed the same script: the need to take on more responsibilities, to find a suitable wife, to ensure the continuation of the Westfield lineage. In the library, while his father talked about new expansion plans, Henry observed a family portrait on the wall. His mother, who had passed away 10 years ago, seemed to look at him with the same kind eyes he had inherited. "And so, what do you think of the Halfords' daughter?" "Caroline. I think that's her name. She was here at the last harvest ball," George Westfield commented, adjusting his glasses on his aquiline nose. "Father, we've talked about this already. Henry, you need to think about the future. You need a wife who understands our position, who can manage this house, who brings good connections." Connections. It was always about that. Since he started attending social events in the region, Henry had noticed how people saw him, not as a man with his own dreams and ideas, but as an opportunity, a path to social or economic ascent. "I need some fresh air," he murmured, standing up abruptly. "I'm going to ride for a while." Riding his black horse, Henry traversed the property boundaries, feeling the wind on his face as a promise of freedom. It was then, as he stopped near a stream, that an idea began to form in his mind. That night, after a silent dinner, Henry stayed awake, staring at the ornate ceiling of his room. He thought about the young women he had met over the past few years, all daughters of good families, educated in the best schools, trained to become suitable wives. There was something rehearsed in every smile, something calculated in every conversation. How will I know that someone loves me for who I am and not for what I have? The question echoed in his mind as sleep eluded him. The next morning, Henry woke up with a determination he hadn't felt in years. After breakfast, he went to his room, and instead of the well-tailored clothes that the tailor always left ready, he searched at the back of the wardrobe for simple pieces he used for occasional manual work. He put on rustic cotton trousers, a faded shirt, and worn-out boots. Looking at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back at him seemed freer, more authentic. Without the weight of his name on his shoulders, who was he really? He wrote a brief letter to his father, explaining that he needed some time for himself to understand his role in the world. He didn't mention his true plans. He knew his father would try to stop him. He left the envelope on the bed and, before the first workers arrived at the main house, set off with a small bundle containing only the essentials. Walking along the dirt road that cut through the property, Henry felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. He was doing something unthinkable for someone of his position, abandoning comfort and security to live as a common man. After hours of walking, he spotted the village of Vale Verde, a small settlement a few kilometres from the Westfield estate. There, where people lived off the work on the land and small local manufacturers, no one would recognise him as the prince of the region. In the central square of the village, Henry observed the gathered workers, waiting for daily job opportunities. Men with calloused hands and faces marked by the sun and time quietly awaited someone to choose them for the day's work. With his heart racing, he joined them. When a local farmer appeared looking for men for the harvest, Henry raised his hand like the others. The man examined him with suspicion. His hands were still too soft, his face too young to show the hardships of rural life. "Have you ever worked in the harvest before, boy?" the farmer asked, frowning. "No, sir," Henry replied honestly. "But I learn quickly and work hard." The man hesitated, but the need for manpower spoke louder. "All right, but if you can't keep up with the pace, there's no payment." Thus began Henry's new life. The first weeks were a brutal shock to his body accustomed to comfort. The sun scorched his skin, the tools left blisters on his hands, his muscles ached in ways he had never imagined possible. At night, in the small room he rented in a modest guest house, he would collapse exhausted onto the thin mattress, barely having the strength to eat. The treatment from the other workers was no better. They mocked his inexperience, the way he held a hoe, how his face burned under the sun. "Ladies' hands," they called him, laughing when he dropped a tool or stumbled carrying a sack. But Henry persisted. Each day became a little easier. Each callus on his hands was an emblem of his determination. And more importantly, for the first time, he was living without the weight of others' expectations. It was during the third week of this new life that Henry met Mary Caldwell. It was late afternoon and he was returning exhausted from the field, walking slowly along the dirt road that led to the village. His stomach growled. He had worked overtime and missed the meal offered at the farm. He sat under the shade of a leafy tree, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he saw a young woman walking down the road carrying a basket covered with a white cloth. She seemed as tired as he was, but there was something in her walk, a silent dignity, a strength that impressed him. Mary noticed his gaze and stopped, hesitant. Something in the young man's exhausted expression touched her heart. Without saying a word, she approached and offered a piece of cake wrapped in a simple cloth napkin. Henry looked surprised at the offering. "I can't accept it. You don't know me." The young woman smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "What little is shared never lacks," she said, with a gentle but firm voice. She left the cake beside him and continued on her way. That unexpected act of kindness remained etched in Henry's memory. In the days that followed, he looked for the young woman whenever he passed through the village. He discovered that her name was Mary Caldwell, the daughter of tenant farmers working on a small nearby property. Her father had fallen ill a few years earlier, leaving her responsible for supporting the family, including 3 younger siblings. Mary would wake up before dawn to prepare pastries to sell at the local market. Then she worked in the fields alongside her older brothers and still found time to care for her bedridden father. Despite the hardships, she maintained a serenity and kindness that made her beloved by everyone in the village. One Sunday morning, Henry saw her at the small local church. Unlike the wealthy girls he had known, Mary did not hide behind affectations or rehearsed smiles. Her simple dress, often mended, did not diminish the dignity with which she carried herself. When their eyes met, she recognized him and smiled briefly before turning her attention back to the pastor. After the religious service, Henry gathered the courage to approach her. "I wanted to thank you for the cake the other day," he said, feeling strangely nervous. "It was just a piece of cake," she replied simply. "Anyone would do the same." "No, they wouldn't," Henry contested, recalling how many in the village had treated him with indifference or disdain. "Your name is Mary, isn't it? I am Henry." That day they talked for a few minutes. She asked where he was from, and Henry vaguely answered that he was looking for his own path. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it omitted the truth about his origin. In the following weeks, Henry sought opportunities to meet Mary. He offered to carry her basket back from the market, helped fix the broken fence of the family's small garden, and brought her wildflowers picked on his way to work. Mary, initially reserved, began to open up. They talked whenever they could while walking down the road. She spoke fondly of her siblings, shared stories about her father before his illness, narrated little joys of everyday life, like the bread that had risen perfectly, or the dress she managed to alter for her younger sister. Henry, in turn, discovered a world he had never truly known, despite having grown up surrounded by farm workers. He learned the value of every penny saved, the importance of a successful harvest, the pride of a job well done with his own hands. One afternoon, while helping Mary carry water to the garden, Henry noticed how she paused to rescue a fallen bird. With delicacy, she placed it in a safe spot, away from the path. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, genuinely curious. "You already have so many worries." Mary looked at him, her eyes reflecting a wisdom that went beyond her 22 years. "Because nothing that suffers should be ignored, if we have the power to help," she replied simply. "My mother always said that kindness is the only luxury the poor can afford freely." At that moment, Henry understood that he was falling in love, not with an idealized image or for social convenience, but with the true essence of an extraordinary woman. As the months passed, the affection between them grew, nurtured by sincere conversations, shared work, and small kindnesses exchanged. Henry discovered in Mary a keen intelligence, unwavering moral strength, and a capacity to find beauty in the simplest things. Even so, the secret of his true identity weighed increasingly heavily. He feared that by revealing who he really was, he would lose the trust he had worked so hard to earn. Winter arrived, bringing a scarcity of work and harsher days for the village families. Henry noticed how Mary was getting increasingly thinner, certainly depriving herself to ensure her siblings had enough. One night, as they walked under the stars after a rare moment of leisure, a small celebration in the village square, Henry made his decision. He could no longer continue with the deception, not with someone who valued honesty so much. "Mary," he said, guiding her to a stone bench away from curious gazes. "There is something I need to tell you." She looked at him attentively, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I haven't been completely honest about who I am," he began, feeling his heart race. "My name is Henry Westfield. I am the son of George Westfield, owner of the Great Oak Farm." The silence that followed seemed endless. Henry expected to see surprise, perhaps anger, or even greed sparked by the revelation. But Mary just looked at him calmly, as if she were absorbing the information without judging him. "Why did you lie?" she finally asked, her voice soft but direct. "I wanted to know what it's like to be seen for who I am, not for what I have," he replied, holding her small, calloused hands. "All my life people have approached me for the name, the fortune, the status. I never knew if anyone really cared about me, Henry, the man." Mary remained silent for a moment, then said simply, "Who you are does not change what I've already seen. A man willing to work, to share, and to love." The relief Henry felt was immense. Not only had Mary not rejected him, but she also showed understanding of exactly why he did what he did. "There is something else I need to tell you," he continued, gathering courage. "These months by your side have been the truest of my life. I love you, Mary, not for what you can give me or for how you make me appear in the eyes of others, but for who you are, for your kindness, your strength, your integrity." Tears glistened in Mary's eyes. "I love you too, Henry, the man who carries water for a garden, who fixes broken fences, who brings wildflowers for no reason at all." That night, under the starry sky, they made plans for the future. Henry talked about returning to the family farm, about taking on his responsibilities, but in a different way, with the values he had learned during his time in the village. "And what about us?" Mary asked hesitantly. "Would your father accept a daughter-in-law like me? Without a name, a dowry, or formal education? Henry smiled, holding her face in his hands. My father will have to understand that I found a treasure more valuable than any fortune. And as for education, you have wisdom that books can't teach. 2 weeks later, Henry returned to the Grande Carvalho farm. His father, who had hired employees to find him, received him with a mixture of relief and irritation. But upon seeing the change in his son, not just the physical strength gained from hard work but especially the new determination in his eyes, he realized that something fundamental had changed. When Henry announced his intention to marry Mary, there was initial resistance. George had envisioned a union with some traditional family that would bring more land or political connections. But upon meeting Mary, seeing how she faced social differences with dignity, behaving with respect but without subservience, he began to understand his son's choice. The wedding took place the following spring, uniting not only two hearts but two worlds. The villagers looked on with amazement and admiration at the simple girl who had won the heart of the region's prince. The wealthy families whispered, some with disdain, others with curiosity. Mary, however, remained true to her essence. In the large farmhouse, she implemented subtle but significant changes. She insisted on knowing each worker by name and kept the doors open to anyone in need of help. Over time, even the most skeptical acknowledged that Henry could not have made a better choice. Under Mary's influence, the Grande Carvalho farm not only thrived economically, but became an example of humane and fair management. Years later, when they already had 3 children running through the fields, Henry found Mary sitting on the same stone bench where he had revealed his identity. He joined her, watching the sunset that coloured the sky. "Any regrets?" he asked, holding her hand. Mary smiled, that same serene smile that had captivated him from the very first moment. "None. And you?" "Only one," he replied thoughtfully. "I regret all the years I lived without knowing true wealth." Mary rested her head on his shoulder, and together they gazed at the lands they now managed as guardians, not as owners. The farm had transformed as much as they had, more welcoming, more just, more alive. In the simplicity of that moment, they both knew they had found the true meaning of abundance. Not in full barns or overflowing coffers, but in the ability to love honestly, work purposefully, and live with gratitude for the daily miracle of being together. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.